When Plants Dream. Ayahuasca, Amazonian Shamanism, and the Global Psychedelic Renaissance. By Daniel Pinchbeck and Sophia Rokhlin. Narrated by Aaron Shedlock, with Lauren Ezzo. Daniel Pinchbeck is the best-selling author of Breaking Open the Head, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, and How Soon Is Now. He co-founded the web magazine Reality Sandwich and the online platform Evolver.net. His essays and articles have appeared in publications including the New York Times, Esquire, Rolling Stone, and Art Forum, and he has been a columnist for Dazed and Confused. Sophia Rokhlin is an anthropologist and nonprofit organizer, working with human and environmental rights organizations. She coordinates a permaculture program with the Chaikuni Institute and directs the regenerative Ayahuasca initiative at the Temple of the Way of Light in the Peruvian Amazon.
Introduction. Daniel. I first took ayahuasca 20 years ago in a high-rise apartment on the East River with two California neo-shamans, a Caucasian couple in flowing robes who brought the brew from Hawaii. At the time, the Vine of Souls was hardly known in New York City. Michael Brownstein, an older poet friend of mine, first told me about it. He belonged to a small underground community of drinkers and got me an invite. That initial journey was nauseating and not particularly revelatory. I had one experience of witness consciousness, watching the process of thoughts forming inside of my head like synaptic clouds. I saw a waterfall cascading in the jungle. I also experienced intense nausea and purged uneventfully. Even so, I was intrigued enough to want to go deeper. Inspired by Jonathan Ott's Ayahuasca Analogs, 1994, I started cooking ayahuasca in my apartment with friends. We bought the powdered plant matter from an online source, Basement Shaman. We drank it without ceremony, sprawled in my living room, listening to Beethoven, Bartok, and Thelonious Monk as we journeyed through astral realms. These journeys left me yearning to explore traditional methods. A year or two later, I went to the Amazon jungle in Ecuador to drink ayahuasca with an indigenous group, the Sequoia, whose future was threatened by deforestation and the encroachment of the oil companies. The Sequoia possessed what seemed to be an ancient tradition with the medicine, which had shaped their culture and spiritual worldview. There were an estimated 30,000 Sequoia living between Peru and Ecuador at the beginning of the 20th century. By the time I visited them, their number had dwindled to fewer than 650, split between two distant villages. Traveling to the Sequoia homeland by plane, bus, and boat, I was struck by the eerie correlation between our industrial civilization's rampant destruction of the rainforest and the power of this ancient visionary medicine that seems to be snaking out of the jungle to reach us in our metropolitan homes. As we pollute the Amazon, strip mine, log, and turn into farms, soybean and oil palm plantations that rapidly turn to dust bowls and scrubland, we also heedlessly annihilate traditional cultures like the Sequoia. When we drink ayahuasca, we find that these cultures hold precious, even essential knowledge for our future. In 2002, I published my first book, Breaking Open the Head, a personal and philosophical inquiry into psychedelic drugs and indigenous shamanic practices. In that work, I explored the gamut of visionary substances, including natural plants like psilocybin mushrooms, peyote, and iboga, as well as synthetic compounds such as LSD, MDMA, ketamine, and 2CB. At the time the book came out, there was little mainstream interest in this field. During the counterculture chaos of the late 1960s, governments made psychedelics illegal, even though just a few years earlier, leading psychologists were promoting the compounds as wonder drugs, the most powerful tools for exploring and understanding the human mind we had ever found. Over the next few decades, our society's gatekeepers demonized and repressed them to an extraordinary degree. Governments forbade scientists from experimenting with psychedelics on human subjects all over the world. Almost all reference to them was removed from psychology textbooks. In the 1990s in New York, where I lived, if you tried to speak seriously about the visionary states induced by these compounds, you would be ridiculed and dismissed. As I researched breaking open the head, I went through a series of astonishing initiations. I went to the equatorial jungles of Gabon in West Africa to take iboga, a visionary plant sacrament that has become renowned for its ability to combat addiction, in an initiation with the Bwiti community. For hours I lay on the ground of the Bwiti temple, traveling back through my life and replaying early childhood memories as well as scenes from my recent past, while the community played twangling harps and pounding drums around us. I visited the Mazatecs in Oaxaca, Mexico, where the magic mushrooms were rediscovered by Gordon and Valentina Wasson, an American banker and his wife in the 1950s. I sat in ceremony with a descendant of the celebrated shaman Maria Sabina. I visited the legendary psychedelic chemist Sasha Shulgin and sampled some of his creations. Shulgin took the known psychedelic compounds and added molecules to them, transforming their effects. Through these journeys, I realized psychedelics were not something useless and marginal, as my society believed. These compounds played a fundamental role in the religious and social life of indigenous cultures across the world. They could be transformative for modern people, such as myself, who had no sense of spiritual connection to the cosmos. This was an area with tremendous potential for humanity's future. It was important news for our time. Our society didn't outlaw and suppress psychedelics because they were particularly dangerous. Alcohol and cigarettes cause far more health problems and many deaths. Psychedelics were suppressed for ideological reasons. In the late 1960s, the establishment felt threatened by a mass opening of consciousness that was leading to movements for social and personal liberation. Journalists developed rhetorical tactics to denigrate psychedelics. Lawmakers passed punitive laws to stop their use, and psychologists halted any exploration of this area. They upheld this moratorium for several decades. It is astonishing that a society like ours, founded on personal freedom, legally prohibits our innate dispensation to explore our own minds. Author Graham Hancock wrote in his 2009 article, The War on Consciousness. At the deepest level, our consciousness is what we are, to the extent that if we are not sovereign over our own consciousness, then we cannot in any meaningful sense be sovereign over anything else either. So it has to be highly significant that, far from encouraging freedom of consciousness, our societies in fact violently deny our right to sovereignty in this intensely personal area, and have effectively outlawed all states of consciousness other than those on a very narrowly defined and officially approved list. Over the last century, mass consumerism became the way of life for most of the world. America and Europe launched the social experiment, which seeks to sugarcoat every aspect of life by providing a product for it. In a consumerist culture, everything is meant to be as safe and comfortable as possible. Unpleasant topics such as death should be kept hidden at all costs. The visionary plant sacraments used by indigenous cultures around the world do not conform to this ideology. Psychedelics like ayahuasca are ordeal medicines. They taste terrible and induce nausea, often leading to intense vomiting or purging. In the process, they force you to confront your own soul. By doing so, they tend to reveal the path to a more authentic happiness. The French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard noted that the mechanism of repression generally has a double function. Repression immediately represses something that is unpleasant or difficult for the conscious mind to remember. But it also seeks to repress the reason why that original repression was necessary. I found that psychedelics have been subject to this double force of social and psychological repression. Our culture not only forgot about them, but we forgot why we needed to forget. In the 15 years since the publication of Breaking Open the Head, something unanticipated happened. Public interest in psychedelics blossomed. Governments allowed scientific research into psychedelics again. This has yielded a slew of extraordinary findings in many areas. Today, we find ourselves in a full-scale psychedelic renaissance. This is happening in a far more grounded and stable fashion than it did in the 1960s. Back then, Timothy Leary, Harvard professor turned psychedelic guru, promoted the slogan, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." He inspired a generation of